Nick, on your show this week, the upcoming show, you're going to be talking about splits in the Republican Party on these ideological questions. And I do find it hard to believe that J.D. Vance is looking to have yet another foreign military intervention. I forgot until you mentioned, Nigeria and Somalia. We just sort of dismissed those. Take us inside the Republican fight.
It's not even a Republican fight, it's a White House fight, right? I mean, to me, the core foreign policy debate, and I'd like to think that, on Compass Points, we're going to reflect this, is...
That was a nice plug.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
That was slick.
Well done.
On one side, you get a traditional, well, let's call it a traditional Republican approach, what Marco Rubio was, perhaps, right?
Muscular interventionist.
Right. And Corey Shockey from the American Enterprise Institute kind of represents that on our show. And so we want to help the Iranian protesters, especially if we've created a moral red line. We want our friends in Europe to be our allies and our friends and not threaten them, right? Then you've got, if you will, the J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff has been on this side, certainly in the argument, the restrainer, let's call it, right? Why are we focused on Latin America? Why are we bombing Iran? Our focus should be China. Donald Trump was elected in 2016 to be a restrainer president. What happened to that? Defense Priorities, a think tank in D.C., has Jen Kavanaugh as their representative, and she's on the show. And then somewhere in the middle, as we've been, basically acknowledging, the president goes either way or not. And that's Heritage Foundation.
That's Heritage. Nancy, this is an interesting question because it's not that Trump might have all of these thoughts at different points in the day. Is that a fair statement, that he encompasses all of this, which is why there's so much confusion?
I think that's absolutely fair. And so I think what's astonishing is he came in as an America First president, that he wasn't going to get involved in international affairs. I think the shock is not that he has so many different ideas, but that it's so at odds with what he promised the administration would be. Remember, he campaigned on fixing the economy, removing illegal immigrants from the country, and now at the start of 2026, we're focusing so much on foreign policy and intervention, and the U.S. military might overseas.
Right. David, I want to turn to you. You spent a very large number of hours with the president just last week, you and three colleagues. I'm going to ask you this question because you were just in the gold showroom that the Oval Office now is. I'm going to ask you a gold-related question. So Machado, the Venezuelan Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the Venezuelan opposition figure, literally gave her physical Nobel Prize to Trump as a way of saying thank you and also encouraging him to help her become president of Venezuela, one assumes. Tell us about that episode and why he took it.
So, strange episode. He has made no secret of his desire for the Nobel Prize. He's made no secret of his anger that President Obama got one, as he said, after just being here a few weeks, right? And there was some element of, embarrassment that he had not even done anything yet when he got that. But along the way, something strange happened where the president seemed to mix up having the medal itself with being named the laureate. And at some point, the Nobel Committee came out and said, once Nobel Prizes are awarded, they're awarded. That's it. They are not transferable.
They can't be given away.
They can't be
for all time.
People have given away, some have sold the actual medal, but that doesn't mean that the person who buys the medal or receives it as a gift is the Nobel laureate.
Wait, are you telling me that if I eat lunch in Pulitzer Hall at Columbia University, that does not make me a Pulitzer winner?
It may not.
Vladimir Putin.
This is a very disturbing turn of events.
Vladimir Putin stole Bob Kraft's Super Bowl ring. I mean, he's got the Super Bowl ring.
What does that say to you about a type of person?
Well, it tells me that he's not a Super Bowl champion, though.
But go to your interview.
In the interview was remarkable for a couple of reasons. I mean, first, when we asked him, why do you feel you need to own Greenland, since under the treaty that we have with Denmark, you can open up the 15 or 16 bases that the U.S. used to have and close down. And he said, it's psychological. I just feel like I need to own it. This was the New York real estate guy in the president basically saying, I know the difference between
He looks at a
owning and
building
leasing.
and says, I want that
Right.
building.
And to some degree, I think there's a bit of that going on with the Nobel Peace Prize here as well, right? He wanted to show off and own the medal. Now, he does have a medal down the hall. It was won by Teddy Roosevelt in 1906, but that doesn't seem to quite do it. The amazing thing when we also did the interview was that was the moment where he said, nothing can stop me, even international law. Depends on how I interpret international law.
No, but he also said his morality.
His morality.
That's the only restraint is
only
his own
restraint.
morality. Yeah, that was an interesting statement. John, speaking of which, let's pivot to some domestic issues. The president is threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minneapolis. We just saw today that the Justice Department is investigating the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor of Minnesota now for maybe obstruction of justice. Tell us what it means to invoke the specter of the Insurrection Act.
Well, look, he came very close to doing this in 2020. He wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act to crack down on the George Floyd protests in 2020. And he was largely stopped from doing so by his defense secretary at the time and his attorney general, who both tried to convince him and also tried to kind of do a little bit of, distracting him from actually going through with something that he really did want to do. There's nobody around to make that argument now. Look, it's a perilous situation because there are absolutely provocations on all sides in Minneapolis, and if it gets violent again, I don't think that he would hesitate to send in active duty U.S. military, which he would have to invoke the Insurrection Act to do.
Nancy, you're a Pentagon correspondent. Is there any sign to you that anyone in the civilian or military leadership in the Pentagon right now would argue against this if the president said the 82nd Airborne is going to Minneapolis?
I think there would be objections to it. I don't know how aggressively they would make the argument, but what you're talking about then potentially, the Insurrection Act allows the military to detain people, to conduct arrests. I think if you look at ICE, many people see it as a political force on behalf of the Trump administration. What happens when you have members of the 82nd smashing windows, detaining Americans alongside those forces? So I don't know how aggressively they'll make the case inside the Pentagon, but I know that it goes against the very ethos of the military that is so desperate to not be politicized. That would be the most demonstrative display of the politicization of the military if it happens.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Nancy, I'm sure maybe you agree with this, but I don't know a single service member, whether enlisted or an officer, senior, junior, who wants this to happen, right? Civilian leadership, fine, maybe they'll have debates with the president, but no soldier, no Marine, no airman, no sailor wants to be seen as a political arm.
Right.
They took their oath, they take their job seriously, and there is, at least among the people I talk to, a great fear and reluctance to take that step.
But again, the Secretary of Defense, and one of the other key things here is you have seen the top ranks of this administration make it clear they believe that ICE officers have, in the words of the Vice President, absolute immunity.
Right. There's this criticism we've heard again and again of government officials, former, current members of Congress, leaders of Congress, that they don't call out what many people would see as this administration's excesses. But here's Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, pushing back on his own threat, the threat of criminal investigation. Just watch this for 1 second.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Nancy, you talk to a lot of ex-military leaders, ex-defense secretaries. You're familiar with all these people. Jerome Powell, very frankly, comes out and says, this is nonsense, what they're doing. I've been struck, going back to what Nick said, I've been struck by the fact that there's very little said in public by people who obviously feel as if the military should not be used in various ways that Trump is thinking of using them. What is the breaking point for them?
You hope it's if they're asked to do something illegal. I would note that Senator Mark Kelly has been charged. If that has a chilling effect. Their service members are being threatened to be dropped in rank, that they lose their retirement. There are real tangible threats that they can make. I'm not justifying silence, but when you talk to people and ask them, why haven't you said more? They come back to you with real fears that they could experience.
And you see that.
I'm sorry, I have to wrap it up, but we'll have you back to make the next point. This is not a 4-hour Trump interview. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry, but I want to thank our guests for joining me, and I want to thank you at home for watching us.